Tom lived in a small cabin on the edge of a quiet valley. The valley was surrounded by gentle hills that glowed orange in the sunset. He liked it because it was peaceful, and he could work on machines and engines without any interruptions. He was a human mechanic, skilled with tools, wires, and gears, and he loved repairing things. Tom was used to working alone, enjoying the sound of metal clinking, the smell of oil, and the warm sunlight that poured through his cabin windows. One evening, after a long day fixing a broken farm vehicle, Tom stepped outside to enjoy the cool air. The sky was painted in shades of purple and pink, and the stars were beginning to appear. Suddenly, a strange rumble echoed across the valley. At first, Tom thought it was thunder. He looked up at the clouds, but the sky was clear. The rumble grew louder, shaking the ground beneath his boots. It was not like anything he had ever heard. His heart began to beat faster. From the edge of the valley, a soft, glowing light appeared. It moved slowly but steadily. Tom squinted and saw strange shapes approaching through the hills. As they came closer, he realized they were creatures unlike anything he had ever seen. They were dragons, but unlike the dragons in old stories. Their scales were completely white, almost shining under the moonlight. They had long, slender necks and wide wings folded by their sides. Their eyes were large and deep, full of intelligence and worry. Tom could feel their fear and exhaustion as if it reached him directly. He froze, unsure what to do. He had never seen dragons in real life. The nearest he had ever come was reading about them in books or seeing old pictures. Yet here they were, moving slowly toward his cabin, their heads low, almost bowing to the ground. One of the dragons, smaller than the others, stepped forward. It lowered its massive head and gave a soft, mournful sound. Tom felt a strange connection to this creature, as if it was trying to speak without words. He realized that these dragons were not dangerous. They were asking for help. The dragons moved closer, forming a circle around Tom's cabin. They did not roar or breathe fire. Their white scales glimmered in the soft moonlight, and their wings trembled slightly. Tom noticed one of them carrying something in its claws. It was a strange object, a mix of metal and crystal, unlike any machine he had ever seen. The dragon placed it carefully on the ground in front of him. The device was cracked and bent, with parts missing or broken. Tom bent down to examine it. He did not understand what it was or how it worked, but he could feel its importance. The dragons watched him closely. Their eyes followed every movement of his hands. One of them let out a low hum, almost like a song. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. These creatures were intelligent. They were not just animals or beasts. They had feelings, thoughts, and a way of communicating that he did not fully understand. He realized that if he ignored them or turned away, they might not survive. The thought made him nervous, but he also felt a strange sense of duty. He could not leave them helpless. Tom picked up the device carefully. It was heavier than it looked, and the crystal inside shimmered faintly. He noticed burn marks on the edges and scratches along the surface. It was damaged, and judging by the dragon's reactions, it was essential for their survival. He looked up at them. The dragon's large eyes were filled with hope and desperation. Tom's hands shook slightly. He was used to fixing cars and machines, but this was different. This was alive in a way, connected to creatures that depended on it. He knew he had to try, no matter how difficult it seemed. As the night grew darker, Tom placed the device on his workbench. The dragons did not leave. They stood outside, waiting patiently, occasionally making low, comforting sounds to each other. Tom studied the device with his tools. He touched wires and metal parts, trying to understand how it worked. He could not find a manual, and there were no instructions. Everything about it was alien, yet he felt a spark of understanding. His curiosity grew stronger than his fear. He began to make small adjustments, carefully bending wires and connecting pieces. Hours passed, and the valley was silent except for the soft humming of the dragons. The moon rose high in the sky, casting silver light on the cabin. Tom worked with steady hands, listening to the creatures outside. Each time he adjusted a piece correctly, one of the dragons made a small sound, almost like encouragement. It was a strange feeling, having creatures trust him completely, yet he felt a growing bond with them. He had never experienced this with any living being before. By midnight, Tom had managed to understand a little more about the device. It seemed to hold energy, a kind of power that the dragons depended on. He did not know exactly how it worked, but he could see that it had to be restored. He wiped sweat from his brow and looked outside. The dragons were still there, standing silently, their white scales almost glowing under the moonlight. Tom realized that they had chosen him. In this quiet valley, far from anyone else, a human mechanic had become the last hope for a herd of albino dragons. Tom took a deep breath. He did not know if he could repair this device, but he knew he could not give up. The dragons were counting on him, and somehow, he felt ready. For the first time in his life, working alone in his cabin did not feel lonely. The dragons had arrived, bringing a new purpose, a new challenge, and a strange sense of friendship that went beyond words. The rumble of the valley faded, and a soft wind passed through the trees. Tom worked through the night, his mind focused, his hands steady, and the dragons kept watch outside. This night marked the beginning of a strange and wonderful journey. A journey where a human mechanic and a herd of albino dragons would come together to face unknown dangers, relying on trust, skill, and the bond that had formed in the quiet valley. The first chapter of their story ended with the soft glow of the device on the workbench, a fragile light in the darkness. Outside, the dragons waited silently, their eyes reflecting hope. Tom knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, but he was ready. He had never imagined that his quiet life could change so completely in a single night. And yet, here it was, a night when the impossible had arrived at his cabin. The morning sunlight spilled across the valley, painting the hills in golden light. Tom rubbed his eyes and stretched. He had stayed awake almost all night, working on the strange device the dragons had brought. He had made a few small repairs, connecting wires and tightening loose pieces, but it was still far from working. The device was unlike anything he had ever seen, with parts that seemed to glow with energy and edges shaped like crystals. He could feel its power pulsing faintly beneath his hands. When Tom stepped outside, he froze for a moment. The herd of albino dragons waited patiently near his cabin. Their white scales shimmered in the morning sun, and their eyes were fixed on him. They did not move closer or make loud noises. Instead, they lowered their heads slightly, as if bowing to show respect or trust. Tom felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. He had never seen animals or creatures behave like this. These dragons were intelligent, and they clearly wanted him to understand them. Tom held the broken device carefully. One of the dragons, slightly smaller than the others, stepped forward and tapped it gently with its claw. The crystal in the device vibrated faintly under the touch. Tom knelt down to look closer. The dragon watched him closely, its large eyes reflecting both fear and hope. He realized that it was trying to tell him something. The device was not just broken, it was their lifeline. The dragons needed it repaired to survive, and they had no other help. Tom did not know how to speak to dragons, and they did not speak any language he could understand. But he tried. He pointed to the device and then gestured toward himself, hoping to show that he could fix it. The dragons tilted their heads, observing him. One of the larger dragons stepped forward and pressed its snout near Tom's hand. Its warm breath brushed against him, and he felt a strange connection. He understood, without words, that they trusted him. Tom set the device on a sturdy table outside his cabin. He picked up his basic tools, screwdrivers, pliers, and wrenches, and began experimenting carefully. The device hummed faintly, and the crystal glowed for a moment, but it flickered as he adjusted wires. The dragons leaned closer, their wings folding gently against their bodies. Tom noticed that whenever he moved in a careful, confident way, the dragons relaxed slightly. Their gestures seemed to encourage him. Each small success made them give soft, humming sounds, almost like cheering. Hours passed, and Tom worked without stopping. He had repaired many machines before, but none were like this. The energy flowing through the device was alive in a way that machines on Earth were not. Sparks sometimes flew, and a small piece of crystal broke off, but he carefully placed it aside. The dragons stayed close, their eyes never leaving him. One of the dragons nudged a small bundle toward him. Inside were strange fruits that glowed faintly. Tom understood they were offering him food as thanks for his effort. He smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. As the sun rose higher, Tom realized that communication was not only about words. It was about understanding gestures, sounds, and feelings. The dragons were patient, and their actions gave him clues. When he adjusted a wire in the wrong place, a dragon would hiss softly and shake its head. When he did something correctly, they would hum or press their heads toward the device. It was not language in the human sense, but it was a clear conversation. Tom felt a deep respect for the creatures. They were not just animals, they were intelligent beings capable of teaching him without words. Tom decided to focus on the crystal core of the device. It seemed to hold the most energy and had the most damage. He carefully examined the cracks and scratches. He tried to clean the edges and reconnect the broken circuits. The dragons watched intently, their tails flicking in anticipation. One of them leaned closer and touched the crystal gently with its claw. Tom felt the vibrations through his hands and realized the crystal responded to touch. He experimented slowly, learning how pressure and alignment affected the energy. By midday, Tom had managed to stabilize part of the device. The crystal glowed steadily for a few seconds, and the dragons gave low, joyful hums. It was a small victory, but it filled him with hope. He noticed that each dragon reacted differently. The largest ones were calm and observant, while the smaller ones moved restlessly, nudging each other and making soft sounds. It was clear they were a family, and their concern for one another was strong. Tom felt connected to them, as if he had become part of their herd, even though he was human. The day passed quickly. Tom did not stop to eat or rest, absorbed in understanding the device. He experimented with different ways to connect the circuits and adjust the crystal. Sometimes, he would fail, and the device would flicker or make a strange sound. When that happened, the dragons would step back, looking worried, but they never left. They stayed with him through every success and every mistake. Tom realized that they were teaching him patience, focus, and care. By late afternoon, Tom had made enough progress to feel confident. The device no longer flickered randomly, and the energy seemed steady. He tested it carefully, moving his hands near the controls. The dragons pressed closer, and their hums grew louder, almost like laughter. Tom laughed too, feeling a bond he had never experienced before. He knew that the device was still not fully repaired, but he was learning. Step by step, he could understand it, and in time, he would restore it completely. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of orange and pink, Tom stepped back and looked at the dragons. Their large eyes reflected trust, hope, and gratitude. He felt proud and honored. He had never imagined that his quiet life as a mechanic could become so meaningful. He had met creatures who depended on him and had begun to understand them without words. The connection they shared was strong and unspoken. Tom decided that tomorrow he would continue. He knew that the path would not be easy, and the device was far from fully repaired. But he also knew that he was not alone. The dragons had chosen him, and he had chosen them. Together, they would face the challenge of restoring the device. The night would bring rest, but the bond between a human mechanic and a herd of albino dragons had already begun to grow. It was the start of a remarkable journey, a journey that neither human nor dragon could have imagined. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the sky, the dragons curled up near the cabin, their scales glowing faintly in the moonlight. Tom watched over them, feeling a sense of responsibility and wonder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, there was peace. The first attempt at communication had succeeded. They had understood each other, and a fragile trust had been formed. It was a trust that would grow stronger as the days passed, and it was the first step in a story that would change the lives of both human and dragon forever. The next morning, Tom awoke to a soft breeze rustling through the trees around his cabin. The valley was calm, but the air carried a faint hum. Tom knew immediately it was coming from the device. The small light within the crystal flickered weakly, almost like it was alive but tired. He drank some water and stepped outside, where the albino dragons were already waiting. Their white scales reflected the soft morning light, and their eyes, large and intelligent, followed his every movement. They did not rush him or make any loud noises. They simply waited patiently, their trust in him unwavering. Tom picked up the device carefully. It felt heavier than it had yesterday, and he could sense that the internal energy was unstable. He placed it on his workbench outside the cabin. The dragons circled around, watching him, their long tails curling and uncoiling gently. Tom studied the crystal core. It was cracked in several places, and strange lines ran through it, glowing faintly. He did not know what they meant, but he could feel that energy was leaking from the crystal. If he did not fix it soon, the dragon's lifeline could fail completely. Tom started by examining the outer frame. The metal pieces were bent and scratched, and some of the connectors were broken. He tried to use tools he knew well, but nothing seemed to fit perfectly. The device was unlike any machine he had worked on. Its technology was beyond Earth, beyond anything mechanical or electronic he had studied. He realized that he would need both patience and creativity to make progress. He took a deep breath, gripping his tools tightly, and focused entirely on the task. The dragons waited silently, their movements minimal, yet they seemed aware of every tool he touched. One of the younger dragons moved closer and tapped a small crystal shard that had fallen from the device. Tom picked it up and inspected it. The crystal was smooth and cool, with lines that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. He tried to fit it back into the device, but the shape did not match perfectly. He sighed but kept working. He tried different angles, heating and cooling small parts, bending metal carefully, and connecting wires in various ways. Each attempt brought a tiny change. Sometimes the device would glow slightly, sometimes it would flicker and go dark. The dragons seemed to sense his frustration. One of the larger ones pressed its snout to the ground softly and let out a low hum. Tom paused, listening. It was almost like the dragon was encouraging him, telling him not to give up. He smiled faintly, feeling warmth and motivation from their presence. This was not just about repairing a machine. It was about trust, about life, about beings who had no other hope. He felt the responsibility heavily, but it strengthened his determination. As the sun climbed higher, Tom discovered that the crystal core reacted to touch in a very specific way. Certain pressures caused faint vibrations, while others made the light inside flicker or dim. He experimented cautiously, learning to sense the energy flows. The dragons watched intently, their heads moving slightly in response to each attempt. Tom began to feel that he was learning the language of the device, understanding it almost intuitively. It was a conversation of hands, of movements, of vibrations, not words. Hours passed, and sweat dripped down Tom's forehead. He wiped it away and examined the device again. He had managed to stabilize one small section, where the crystal glowed steadily without flickering. The dragons leaned closer, humming softly, and one nudged his shoulder with its snout. Tom laughed softly. Their encouragement was powerful, more than he had expected. Each small victory strengthened his confidence, yet he knew that the device was far from fully repaired. There were more cracks, more loose wires, more strange components he did not yet understand. Tom decided to take a new approach. He dismantled part of the frame and examined the inner wiring. The wires were unlike any he had seen. They glowed faintly, and their material was flexible yet strong. He realized that his earth tools might not be enough. Thinking quickly, he improvised, using parts from old machines he had kept in his cabin. He bent metal, reshaped wires, and carefully aligned crystals in patterns that seemed to match the original design. The dragons watched closely, moving their wings slightly as if giving silent guidance. By late afternoon, Tom had made noticeable progress. The crystal core glowed steadily, and the strange hum from the device was stronger and more consistent. The dragons gave soft, low sounds of approval. They did not rush him, but their presence encouraged him to continue. Tom felt a bond growing between them. He was learning from the dragons as much as they were learning from him. Their patience, their intelligence, and their silent guidance were teaching him lessons he could never have learned alone. Despite his progress, Tom knew the device was still fragile. One wrong move could cause the crystal to shatter or the energy to leak. He worked slowly, carefully adjusting connections and reinforcing fragile parts. The dragons remained close, their tails brushing lightly against the ground and each other. Tom could feel their trust radiating toward him, and it gave him strength. He understood that he was no longer just repairing a device. He was protecting lives, forming a bond that transcended species. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the valley, Tom paused to rest. He looked at the dragons. Their eyes were filled with patience, trust, and hope. For the first time, he realized that this was not just a task or a challenge. It was a shared journey. He had been chosen to help these creatures because of his skill, his determination, and his willingness to care. He felt a sense of pride and responsibility. Tom took a deep breath and looked at the device once more. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps even breakthroughs. He knew that repairing this alien technology would test his patience, creativity, and courage. But he also knew that he was not alone. The dragons were with him, watching, encouraging, and trusting him completely. Their bond gave him confidence. He would continue, step by step, until the device was fully restored and the dragons were safe. That night, the dragons curled up near the cabin, their scales shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Tom watched them, feeling a mixture of awe and determination. The struggle with alien technology was only beginning, but he knew that together, they could overcome it. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, and he was ready. The bond between a human mechanic and a herd of albino dragons had deepened, and their shared journey was only just beginning. The night was quiet except for the soft hum of the device and the gentle breathing of the dragons. Tom felt a sense of peace, knowing that even in the midst of struggle, there was trust, hope, and the beginning of something extraordinary. He closed his eyes, ready to face the next day, ready to continue learning, and ready to keep the promise he had made to the dragons. The morning sun rose over the valley, painting the hills in warm gold. Tom stepped outside his cabin, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. The albino dragons were already waiting near the cabin, their white scales glimmering in the sunlight. They moved slowly, watching him carefully, their long tails brushing against the grass. Tom had grown accustomed to their presence, yet each time he saw them, he felt awe. They were majestic, intelligent, and deeply aware of the world around them. The night's work had brought small progress. The crystal core of the device glowed steadily, though faintly, and the humming energy was more consistent than before. Tom knew there was much more to do, but today felt different. Today, he felt a connection with the dragons that went beyond simple trust. He understood their gestures, their soft hums, and even the flicks of their wings. Each movement carried meaning, and he was learning to listen in ways he had never imagined. Tom set the device on his workbench outside the cabin. One of the dragons, slightly smaller than the rest, stepped closer and tapped the crystal gently with its claw. The crystal shimmered faintly. Tom smiled. He had realized that the dragons were not only waiting for him to repair the device, but they were also teaching him how to work with it. Their guidance was subtle, through gestures and movements rather than words. He began to pay attention to the patterns, learning to understand the energy flows through the crystal. Hours passed as Tom worked steadily. He adjusted wires, reinforced weak points, and experimented carefully with the crystal core. The dragons watched closely, occasionally nudging him toward a part he had overlooked. Tom realized that their presence was calming and motivating. He felt a sense of partnership forming. For the first time, he felt that he was not alone in the valley. The dragons were not just creatures asking for help, they were companions, sharing in the challenge and the hope. During a brief break, Tom observed them more closely. The largest dragons rested their wings, their eyes following his movements. The smaller ones nudged each other gently, sometimes playing lightly in the grass before returning their attention to him. Tom could sense a hierarchy within the herd, an understanding of family and responsibility. He felt honored to be included in this world, even as an outsider. The dragons were teaching him patience, care, and empathy in ways he could not have learned alone. Tom returned to the device with renewed energy. He carefully aligned the crystal core with the inner frame, using a combination of old earth tools and parts he had improvised. He could feel the energy shifting, responding to his touch. The crystal glowed brighter, and the humming became steady. The dragons let out soft, low sounds, almost like laughter. Tom laughed too, feeling a joy he had never experienced while working on any machine. This was not only about repairing a device, it was about building trust, connection, and understanding. By midday, Tom had learned to anticipate the reactions of the device and the dragons. When he moved a wire in the correct way, a dragon would hum or nudge the crystal gently. When he made a mistake, a dragon would tilt its head and emit a soft, warning sound. Tom realized that these interactions were teaching him the rhythm of the device. He was learning faster than he could have imagined, and the dragons seemed pleased with his progress. Their approval was subtle but powerful, and it strengthened his determination to succeed. Tom also noticed how the dragons cared for each other. When one of the smaller dragons seemed tired, the others nudged it gently and circled around protectively. They moved with a grace and intelligence that amazed him. It was clear that they had lived through many challenges together, relying on each other for safety and guidance. Tom understood that the device was only one part of their survival. Their bond as a herd was equally vital, and he felt privileged to be included in it. As the afternoon sun climbed high, Tom made a significant breakthrough. By carefully adjusting the crystal core and reinforcing the outer frame, he managed to stabilize a large section of the device. The energy pulsed steadily, and the humming became constant. The dragons leaned closer, their eyes shining with approval and relief. One of them pressed its head gently against his shoulder. Tom felt a warm, calming sensation. The gesture was simple, yet it carried profound meaning. They trusted him completely, and he trusted them in return. Tom realized that the bond between him and the dragons had grown stronger in just a few days. They were no longer merely waiting for him to repair the device. They were partners in a shared task, connected by trust and mutual respect. The dragons had taught him more about patience, observation, and empathy than he had ever learned from any machine or tool. He felt a sense of pride and responsibility, knowing that their lives now rested in part on his skills and care. As evening approached, Tom cleaned his tools and set them aside. The device glowed softly, steady and stable for the first time. The dragons gathered near the cabin, their wings folding gently and their long tails curling around them. Tom walked among them, feeling the warmth of their presence. He had come to understand their language, their gestures, and their moods. In return, they had come to understand him. It was a bond that transcended words, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The valley grew quiet as the sun dipped below the hills. Stars began to appear in the sky, reflecting faintly in the dragon's white scales. Tom watched them, feeling a sense of wonder and gratitude. He had never imagined that repairing a strange alien device would bring him such companionship and understanding. The dragons were not just creatures in need, they were teachers, friends, and partners. Their bond was real and profound, and he knew it would guide him through the challenges ahead. That night, Tom sat outside his cabin, observing the herd. They curled up close to each other, their breathing calm and steady. The device glowed softly on the workbench, humming with stable energy. Tom felt a sense of peace and satisfaction. The bond he had formed with the dragons had grown stronger, and he knew it would continue to deepen with each passing day. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps even new lessons, but for now, there was harmony in the valley. The stars twinkled above, the wind whispered through the trees, and the dragons rested near the cabin. Tom smiled, feeling a quiet joy he had never known before. The connection between a human mechanic and a herd of albino dragons had grown, and it was a bond that would guide them through the trials ahead. Together, they were stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges the future held. The journey was just beginning, and Tom felt ready to continue, step by step, with the dragons at his side. The valley was quiet that morning, with soft sunlight spilling over the hills. Tom stepped outside his cabin, carrying tools and spare parts. The dragons were already waiting, their white scales gleaming in the sunlight. They moved with quiet grace, their long tails brushing the grass, and their eyes were fixed on him. Tom had grown used to their presence, but each morning, he felt awe at their beauty and intelligence. He had come to care deeply for them, and he knew that the work he was doing was vital for their survival. The device sat on the workbench, glowing faintly but steadily. Tom had repaired large portions of it, yet he knew that it was still fragile. The crystal core pulsed with energy, but there were cracks that threatened to destabilize it. The dragons pressed close, observing his every move. Tom felt the weight of responsibility. He understood that the device was essential for the herd, and if it failed, they might not survive. He had never felt such pressure before, but it strengthened his focus. As he worked, a soft rumble shook the valley. At first, Tom thought it was the wind, but it grew stronger. He looked up toward the hills and saw lights moving in the distance. Strange ships glided silently above the trees. They were unlike anything Tom had seen before. The shapes were sleek and metallic, with glowing lights tracing their edges. He realized immediately that these were not friendly visitors. His heart raced. The dragons sensed it too. Their ears twitched, their wings lifted slightly, and they made low, warning hums. Tom understood the danger. These ships were hunters, and they had been searching for the dragons. The marks on the device, the burn marks and scratches, now made sense. The dragons had been attacked before, and these hunters were still nearby. He looked at the herd and saw fear in their large, intelligent eyes. He felt a surge of determination. He could not let these creatures be harmed, not after they had trusted him. He knew he had to protect them, and that meant repairing the device completely and quickly. The dragons moved closer to him, nudging the workbench with their heads. Tom understood they wanted him to hurry, but not recklessly. He adjusted his tools and focused on the crystal core. He carefully aligned broken wires and reconnected circuits. The energy within the crystal pulsed in response to his touch. The dragons hummed softly, encouraging him. Each successful adjustment brought a small glow to the core, and the device became more stable. Tom felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. They needed him, and he could not fail. Tom paused for a moment to observe the dragons. They were calm but alert. The largest dragon raised its wings slightly, scanning the sky. Its head tilted as if listening for danger. The smaller dragons huddled closer to each other, trusting the larger ones to protect them. Tom realized that the device was not the only thing keeping them safe. Their bond as a herd, their understanding of each other, and their intelligence were equally vital. He felt honored to be part of this circle, to have their trust and to be their helper. As he continued working, the ships drew closer. Tom could see the hunters' lights moving carefully through the valley. They were searching, scanning for any sign of the dragons. The dragons became tense. Their hums grew louder, and their tails flicked against the ground nervously. Tom knew that if the hunters found them before the device was fully repaired, it could mean disaster. He worked faster but carefully, adjusting fragile components and reinforcing weak points. Every movement mattered. Hours passed, and Tom made significant progress. The crystal core glowed steadily, and the device hummed with constant energy. The dragons leaned close, their heads brushing gently against his shoulders and arms. Their gestures gave him confidence, guiding his hands to areas that needed attention. He realized that this was not just a repair job. It was a shared mission, a collaboration between human and dragon. They were teaching him, helping him, and trusting him completely. Suddenly, a sharp flash of light from the hunters' ships reflected in the valley. The dragons hissed softly, wings lifting defensively. Tom knew the danger was real. The hunters would not give up easily. He looked at the device and felt the weight of urgency. Every second counted. He worked with steady hands, connecting the last fragile wires and stabilizing the crystal core. The energy pulsed through the device more strongly now, and he could feel its power stabilizing. The dragons watched intently, their eyes bright with hope and trust. By late afternoon, the device was almost fully repaired. The crystal core shone with steady light, and the humming energy was consistent and strong. The dragons nudged him gently, as if congratulating him. Tom felt relief and pride, but he knew the danger was not gone. The hunters were still nearby, and the dragons were vulnerable. He looked at them and made a silent promise. He would protect them. He would finish the repairs and make sure they were safe. As the sun dipped below the hills, the valley was bathed in soft orange light. The hunters' ships were still in the distance, but the dragons were ready. Tom stepped back and observed them. Their scales glowed faintly in the sunset, and their eyes reflected trust and intelligence. He felt a deep bond with these creatures, stronger than anything he had ever known. Together, they had survived danger and uncertainty. Together, they would face whatever came next. That night, Tom sat outside his cabin, watching the dragons rest. The device hummed softly, glowing steadily on the workbench. The hunters were gone for now, but their presence had revealed the real danger the dragons faced. Tom understood that his role was more than repair work. He was their protector, their ally, and their friend. The hidden danger had been revealed, and he was ready to confront it. The stars appeared in the sky, and the valley grew quiet. The dragons curled up near the cabin, their wings folding gently around their bodies. Tom felt a mixture of awe, responsibility, and determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready. The bond between human and dragons had grown stronger, and their shared journey was far from over. Together, they would face the dangers of the world, relying on trust, skill, and courage to survive. The morning air was crisp and cool, filling the valley with a sense of calm. Tom stepped outside his cabin, carrying his tools carefully. The albino dragons were already gathered near the workbench, their white scales gleaming in the sunlight. Their large eyes followed his every movement, filled with hope and quiet expectation. Tom had come a long way in understanding both the dragons and the alien device. He knew this day would be critical. Today, he would attempt the final repair. The device rested on the workbench, its crystal core glowing faintly. Over the past days, Tom had stabilized most of it, repaired fragile circuits, and reinforced the outer frame. Yet, some parts remained delicate, especially the crystal core. It pulsed with energy, responding to the surrounding environment and the dragon's movements. Tom took a deep breath. Every step had to be careful. One wrong move could shatter the crystal or destabilize the energy completely. The dragons waited patiently, their wings folding gently against their bodies. One of the smaller dragons nudged the crystal lightly with its snout. Tom watched closely. He realized the creatures were guiding him, giving subtle cues about the device's needs. Their trust strengthened his resolve. He set his tools carefully on the bench and began examining the connections. Each wire and crystal shard had to be aligned perfectly. He worked slowly, feeling the energy through his fingertips. Hours passed as Tom focused on the task. The sun rose high above the hills, shining down on the valley. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his hands were sore, but he did not stop. He tested each wire and crystal alignment, adjusting, bending, and reconnecting as needed. Every time the crystal core pulsed steadily, he felt a small surge of hope. The dragons hummed softly, their low sounds vibrating through the air, almost like encouragement. They were teaching him patience and precision without a single word. At midday, Tom reached the most delicate part of the repair. A section of the crystal core had a deep crack that threatened the stability of the entire device. He paused, considering his options. He could try to fit a replacement crystal shard, but it was risky. A single mistake could shatter the core. The dragons seemed to sense his hesitation. One of the larger dragons stepped forward and pressed its snout gently against the crystal. The energy pulsed, and Tom realized they were offering him guidance. Their trust was absolute, and he felt the responsibility weigh heavily on him. With careful hands, Tom inserted the replacement shard. He adjusted the connections, aligning each wire and support beam. The crystal vibrated faintly, and then it pulsed steadily, brighter than ever before. The dragons let out soft, harmonious hums, their wings fluttering slightly in relief. Tom smiled, feeling pride and wonder. The device was finally stable, its energy steady and powerful. The final repair was complete. He could not believe he had succeeded, but the evidence was clear. The crystal glowed with life, and the humming energy filled the air with warmth. The dragons moved closer, circling the device and nudging each other in excitement. One of the smaller dragons pressed its head gently against Tom's arm, a silent gesture of gratitude. Tom laughed softly, feeling a deep connection with these creatures. They had trusted him with their lives, and he had fulfilled that trust. The bond between human and dragons had grown stronger than he could have imagined. He realized that this moment was not just about fixing a device, it was about teamwork, understanding, and mutual respect. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the hills, Tom and the dragons observed the valley. The hunters' ships were gone, but Tom knew that the restored device would give the dragons the strength to defend themselves if danger returned. The crystal core pulsed steadily, a symbol of their survival and resilience. Tom felt a quiet pride in his work. He had learned from the dragons as much as they had relied on him. Their presence had taught him patience, observation, and empathy, lessons far beyond anything he had experienced with machines alone. Tom spent the rest of the day reinforcing the device further, ensuring that it would withstand any strain. The dragons assisted in their own way, nudging parts into place or holding small components steady with their claws and snouts. It was a collaboration, a dance of trust and skill between human and alien creatures. Every adjustment was met with soft hums and nods from the dragons. Tom felt a sense of harmony and accomplishment. The final repair was not just mechanical, it was a shared achievement. As evening fell, the valley was bathed in golden light. The device glowed steadily on the workbench, humming with energy. The dragons gathered near Tom, their wings folded gently, and their long tails curled around each other. Tom walked among them, feeling the warmth of their presence. They had been through danger, struggle, and uncertainty together, and now they were strong. The bond between human and dragons had reached a new level. They trusted him completely, and he trusted them in return. That night, the valley was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of the restored device. Tom sat outside his cabin, watching the dragons curl up near the workbench. Their scales reflected the soft moonlight, and their breathing was calm and steady. He felt a mixture of awe, pride, and gratitude. The final repair was complete, and the dragons were ready to face the world once more. He had learned that strength came not only from skill but from trust, patience, and connection. As stars twinkled above, Tom understood the importance of this day. The journey had been challenging, but it had forged a bond that could not be broken. The dragons would remember his help, and he would always remember their trust. Together, they had faced danger and succeeded. The final repair marked not just the restoration of a device, but the triumph of courage, perseverance, and friendship. Tomorrow, he knew, the dragons would take to the skies again. The valley would be quiet, and life would continue. Yet the memory of this day, the bond they had formed, and the trust they shared would remain forever. Tom had become more than a mechanic. He had become a protector, a friend, and a part of a herd unlike any other. The final repair was complete, and the adventure had reached a moment of triumph, but the story of human and dragons was far from over. The morning sun rose over the valley, filling it with a warm golden light. Tom stepped outside his cabin and looked at the herd of albino dragons gathered near the workbench. Their scales shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting every color of the valley. The crystal device hummed steadily, its energy now fully restored. Tom felt a sense of pride and relief. He had completed the final repair, and the dragons were strong again. But today was different. Today, he knew, they would leave. The dragons moved slowly, stretching their long wings and raising their heads. They had healed, their energy restored, and their spirits renewed. Tom watched them carefully, feeling a mixture of happiness and sadness. Over the past days, he had grown close to these creatures. They had trusted him completely, and he had learned so much from them. Patience, care, understanding, and courage, these were lessons that went beyond fixing machines. They were lessons of life itself. One of the larger dragons stepped forward, lowering its head to the ground. Its eyes met Tom's, and he felt a deep connection. The dragon nudged him gently, pressing its head against his chest. Tom placed his hand on its snout, feeling the warmth and trust radiating from the creature. A silent understanding passed between them. He had helped them survive, and in return, they had shared a bond that would last forever. The smaller dragons moved closer, their tails curling around the larger ones. They made soft, harmonious sounds, a language of trust and gratitude. Tom smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The valley was quiet except for the gentle hum of the device and the soft breathing of the dragons. He knew that their journey together had reached an important moment. They would fly again, exploring the skies and living freely, and he had helped make that possible. Suddenly, distant lights appeared on the horizon. The hunters were returning, scanning the valley for any sign of the dragons. Tom's heart raced. He knew the dragons were ready now. The restored device gave them strength and protection. The largest dragon spread its wings, the muscles rippling under its white scales. The smaller dragons followed, stretching their wings and preparing for flight. Tom watched in awe as the herd moved as one, a perfect display of grace and power. Tom approached the device one last time. He pressed a few final adjustments, ensuring that the energy flow was steady and the protective systems were active. The crystal glowed brightly, humming with a steady, powerful rhythm. The dragons pressed closer to the device, their heads touching it gently as if to say goodbye. Tom felt a lump in his throat. He had grown attached to these creatures, and now it was time to let them go. With a deep breath, Tom stepped back. The largest dragon crouched slightly, then launched into the air, its wings cutting through the morning light. The smaller dragons followed, flapping gracefully and rising above the valley. Tom watched as they soared, their white scales gleaming like stars against the blue sky. They moved as a herd, synchronized and strong, a living testament to their bond and resilience. The hunters appeared closer now, but the dragons were ready. The device's energy created a shield of light that surrounded the herd, pushing the ships back without harm. Tom watched in amazement. He had helped create this moment, had given the dragons the chance to survive and protect themselves. They rose higher, gliding over the hills, their wings catching the sunlight, leaving a trail of shimmering light in their wake. As the herd disappeared into the horizon, the valley grew quiet. Tom stood alone, feeling a mixture of loss and pride. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that few humans would ever experience. He had helped creatures from another world, and in return, they had shared their trust and friendship. He knew that somewhere in the vast skies, the herd of albino dragons remembered him, just as he would remember them. Tom returned to his cabin, the hum of the restored device fading gently as he closed the door. He reflected on the past days, the struggle, the learning, and the bond he had formed. He realized that life had changed for him. He was no longer just a mechanic in a quiet valley. He was part of something greater, a story of courage, trust, and the strength of human ingenuity. He had proven that even a single human could make a difference for creatures from another world. Night fell over the valley, and stars twinkled in the sky. Tom sat outside, thinking about the dragons and the journey they had shared. He knew that challenges would come again, that the valley would continue to change, but the memory of the herd would remain with him. He had witnessed their intelligence, grace, and resilience. He had been trusted, and he had not failed. That knowledge gave him strength and purpose. The device sat quietly in the cabin, its energy stabilized. It was no longer just a machine, it was a symbol of the bond between human and dragons. Tom understood that this moment, this final farewell, was not the end. It was a beginning, an enduring legacy of trust, skill, and courage. He had learned lessons that would guide him for the rest of his life. And the dragons, free and strong, would carry his memory across the skies, a silent promise of gratitude and friendship. Tom smiled softly, feeling warmth in his chest. The journey had been extraordinary, the struggles intense, but the reward had been greater than he could have imagined. He had helped save a herd of albino dragons, and in the process, he had discovered something remarkable about himself. Courage, patience, ingenuity, and compassion, the qualities that made humans unique, had been tested and proven. He had earned their trust, and they had left a mark on his life forever. As the stars shimmered above, Tom looked toward the horizon. He imagined the dragons soaring through distant skies, their white scales gleaming in the sunlight. Somewhere out there, they were free and strong, and they would always remember the human who had helped them when they needed it most. Tom felt a quiet peace, knowing that the story of human and dragons would continue, far beyond the valley, carried in memory, trust, and the bond they had shared. The night was still, the valley calm. Tom returned to his cabin, the hum of the restored device fading into quiet energy. He knew life would go on, and he would continue his work, but he would never forget the extraordinary journey of courage, trust, and friendship he had shared with the albino dragons. Their farewell was not the end, it was a legacy, a story of how one human had made a difference, and how trust and courage could bridge worlds.